The gravel road stretched ahead like a grey ribbon laid gently upon the forest floor. It was a bright, sunny day, one of those where the light filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground in dancing patterns of gold and green. My husband and I had ventured out that morning with a simple goal: to rediscover a part of my past, a place where an encounter years ago had left me changed. I never thought I would return to these woods, much less by choice. But the curiosity gnawed at me, outweighing the fear I carried since that fateful day in 2003. The road twisted through the thick trees, their trunks standing like silent sentinels. The SUV's tires crunched over loose stones, the sound somehow muffled by the weight of the looming forest. I watched the surroundings pass by, memories flickering in my mind. My husband, David, kept his eyes on the road, his expression a mix of determination and quiet reassurance. He'd always been my rock, and he knew I needed his strength to face whatever lay ahead. When we finally pulled into the small clearing near the old cabin, the air seemed to grow heavier, the silence deeper. I stepped out, my boots crunching on the gravel. The place was eerily unchanged. Time hadn't touched the cabin much. It was still nestled among the trees, a relic of another era. The air carried the scent of pine, damp earth, and a faint trace of something sour I couldn't quite place. As I scanned the surroundings, I couldn't shake the sense that we were being watched. I wanted to dismiss the unease, chalk it up to the weight of returning to a place tied to such a visceral memory. But the sensation clung to me as we began our hike. David carried a small pack with our essentials: water, snacks, and a 9mm pistol for safety. I had my binoculars slung around my neck, their weight a constant reminder of why we were here. The last time I had looked through them in these woods, I had seen something that defied explanation. The trail wound upward, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than I'd like to admit. The woods seemed unnaturally still, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. There were no birdsong or rustling leaves, just the sound of our boots crunching on the dirt path. I whispered to David, asking if he noticed it too. He nodded, his jaw tightening, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. As we climbed higher, the smell hit me, a sharp, pungent odor like urine mixed with something metallic. It came in waves, growing stronger as we moved forward. I stopped, scanning the area with my binoculars. My heart thudded as I saw movement, a dark shadow shifting between the trees. It was fast, almost a blur, but it was there. I lowered the binoculars, my hands shaking. When I told David what I'd seen, he frowned, scanning the area himself. Probably a deer, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. We pressed on, and soon we came upon an odd sight, a tree standing in a clearing, its branches arranged unnaturally. Some were stacked vertically, others horizontally, almost as if someone or something had deliberately placed them there. It didn't look like the work of wind or chance. David walked up to the tree, running his fingers over the bark. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured, his voice barely audible. I took out my phone and snapped a picture. The arrangement was too deliberate to ignore. As I turned to take another shot from a different angle, I caught a glint of light through the trees. Raising the binoculars, I scanned the area. My breath caught in my throat. Eyes, black, soulless eyes, stared back at me from the shadow of a tree. They didn't blink, didn't waver. I felt a cold chill race down my spine, rooting me to the spot. "David," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "It's there. It's watching us." He turned sharply, but by the time he raised his binoculars, the figure was gone. The branches swayed slightly as if something had brushed past them. We continued, though my legs felt like they were moving through molasses. Every step brought the weight of dread closer. The forest felt alive, not with the usual vibrancy of nature, but with an awareness, a presence that was palpably watching us. As we reached a slope leading down to a narrow creek, we found footprints. They were massive, pressed deep into the soft earth. Each one was over 16 inches long, the impressions showing the clear outline of toes. David crouched, measuring the depth with his hand. "This is fresh," he said, glancing around. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He looked up at me. "It's close." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "We should turn back." He hesitated, but nodded. As we retraced our steps, the forest seemed to close in around us. The shadows grew darker, the silence deeper. Then came the knock-a-sharp, resonant sound, like wood striking wood. It echoed through the trees, coming from somewhere ahead of us. David froze, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his side. Another knock followed, this time from behind us, then a third to our left. My heart raced as the realization hit we were surrounded. We picked up our pace, not quite running, but moving as quickly as we could without making noise. The knocks continued intermittently, each one tightening the grip of fear around my chest. As we neared the clearing where the SUV was parked, I raised my binoculars one last time, scanning the area for any sign of movement. And there it was. The figure stood partially obscured by a tree, its massive frame blending into the shadows. It was tall, at least 8 feet, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung almost to its knees. Its fur was black, sleek in some places and matted in others, but it was the face that held me captive, grey skin stretched over angular features, and those eyes, black as obsidian. They stared at me with an intelligence that sent a wave of terror crashing over me. It blinked. The movement snapped me out of my frozen state. I dropped the binoculars, stumbling back. "David!" I choked out, my voice trembling. "It's here." David's head whipped toward me, and he reached out to steady me as I teetered on the edge of a shallow ravine. "We need to move," he said, his voice firm but calm. He led me down the slope, our footsteps hurried but careful. The creature didn't follow, at least not that we could see, but the oppressive sense of being watched never left. As we reached the SUV, I turned for one last look. The woods stood still, a wall of green and shadow. But I knew it was there, just beyond the edge of sight, watching, waiting. We climbed into the SUV, slamming the doors behind us as if the mere barrier of steel and glass could protect us from what lingered in those woods. My hands shook as I fumbled with the seatbelt. David started the engine, the sound breaking the oppressive silence. For a moment, I thought about telling him to step on the gas and get us out of there as quickly as possible, but I didn't want to speak. Speaking felt like it would acknowledge what we had seen, what had followed us. The tires crunched over the gravel as David turned the vehicle back onto the road. I couldn't help but glance out the window, scanning the trees for any movement. My heart sank as I caught sight of a shadow slipping between the trunks, moving parallel to us. It was fast, impossibly fast, covering the rough terrain with an ease that sent a fresh wave of panic through me. "David," I whispered, my voice trembling, "it's keeping up." He glanced at me, his expression unreadable, and pressed the accelerator slightly. The vehicle picked up speed, but the shadow continued to move, always just at the edge of my vision. It was as though it wanted me to know it was there, wanted me to feel its presence. I couldn't take my eyes off the trees, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow was gone. The forest looked normal again, serene even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. The rest of the drive was a blur, my mind replaying the moment I had locked eyes with the creature. Those eyes would haunt me for the rest of my life. Back home, the world felt different. Our house, once a place of comfort, now seemed fragile, inadequate. The walls felt too thin, the windows too vulnerable. I kept the blinds drawn and double-checked every lock, but the sense of safety eluded me. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside sent my heart racing. David tried to reassure me, but I could see the unease in his own eyes. He didn't speak about what we had seen, not directly. Instead, he threw himself into researching. He spent hours poring over books and websites, looking for answers, for something that could explain the creature we had encountered. But the more we learned, the less comfort we found. The accounts we read mirrored our own in disturbing detail. Massive, hair-covered creatures spotted in remote forests, their presence marked by strange sounds, tree structures, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Some described encounters that turned violent, stories of people who went missing, their bodies never found. I tried to push those thoughts aside, but they lingered, festering like an open wound. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its face. Those black eyes, unblinking and all-consuming, stared back at me in the darkness of my mind. The rational part of me wanted to believe it was just an animal, something explainable. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't just an animal. It was something more. 2 weeks later, David suggested we go back. The thought alone made my stomach churn, but I knew he was right. We couldn't let fear control us. If we didn't face it now, it would haunt us forever. We packed carefully this time, bringing more supplies and ensuring we had proper equipment to document anything we found. David insisted on bringing a trail camera and a drone, tools to help us observe from a distance. I clung to my binoculars, though the thought of using them again filled me with dread. The drive back was silent, tension hanging between us like a thick fog. As we turned onto the gravel road, my heart rate spiked. Everything about the place felt wrong. The air was too still, the light too dim, even in the middle of the day. When we parked, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. David placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We've got this," he said, but as I stepped out of the SUV, I felt the weight of those woods settle over me again, heavy and suffocating. The sense of being watched returned instantly, stronger than before. I scanned the trees, half expecting to see those eyes staring back at me. We started down the trail, moving cautiously. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the whisper of the wind through the trees. The forest was alive, but not in the way it should have been. It felt aware. As we ventured deeper, we found more sines trees with their branches twisted and snapped, arranged in unnatural patterns. Large footprints pressed into the soft ground, some fresh enough to still hold their shape. David took pictures, carefully documenting each discovery. He seemed almost excited, as though the evidence validated what we had seen, but I couldn't share his enthusiasm. Every new sign felt like a warning, a reminder that we were trespassing in someone else's domain. The smell hit us again, that same pungent stench of urine and decay. It was stronger this time, almost overpowering. David scanned the area, his hand resting on the pistol at his side. "It's close," he murmured, his voice barely audible. I didn't need him to tell me. I could feel it. The oppressive presence, the eyes that seemed to pierce through the trees. My grip tightened on the binoculars, but I couldn't bring myself to raise them. I didn't want to see it again. Not like that. We reached the creek, the water trickling softly over the rocks. David knelt to examine a large footprint embedded in the muddy bank. It was over 17 inches long, the toes splayed wide. "This isn't a bear," he said, his voice firm. I nodded, unable to speak. I didn't need convincing. I knew exactly what it was. The feeling of being watched intensified as we continued along the creek. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was following us, moving just out of sight. The occasional crack of a branch or rustle of leaves confirmed it. David kept his hand near his pistol, his eyes scanning the trees. Then came the knocks. The sound echoed through the forest, sharp and deliberate. First one, then another, from different directions. It was a language, I was sure of it, a way for them to communicate, to coordinate. I clutched David's arm, my pulse racing. We stopped in a small clearing, the sunlight barely breaking through the canopy above. David set up the trail camera, positioning it to cover the area where we had heard the most noise. I watched the trees, my breath hitching every time a shadow shifted, and then I saw it. Far in the distance, partially obscured by the undergrowth, was a figure. It was massive, its dark silhouette blending seamlessly with the forest. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but it was there, watching. For a moment I thought I was imagining it. The figure stood so still, so perfectly camouflaged among the trees, that it could have been part of the forest itself. But then it moved, just slightly, a shift in its stance, or the way its shadow fell across the brush. My breath caught in my throat and I grabbed David's arm, digging my nails into his jacket. "What?" he whispered, his voice low, his tone urgent. I could barely manage to lift a trembling hand, pointing toward the figure. "There!" I choked out. "By the big oak. It's standing there." David squinted, following my direction. His jaw tightened as his eyes locked onto the spot. "I see it," he said grimly. "Stay close." His hand went to the gun holstered at his hip, but he didn't draw it. His calmness should have reassured me, but instead, it only made me more aware of how grave the situation was. The creature didn't move, but I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and oppressive. It wasn't just watching, it was studying us, measuring us. My mind raced with questions. Why wasn't it approaching? Why wasn't it running? Was it alone? David took a slow step forward, his movements deliberate, his body language almost submissive, as if he were trying to show that he wasn't a threat. I wanted to scream at him to stop, to turn back, but the words caught in my throat. My legs felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure stepped back into the shadows. It moved with an uncanny grace, its massive frame gliding through the dense underbrush without a sound. Within seconds, it was gone, swallowed by the forest. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the usual sounds of the woods, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds had disappeared, leaving a void that pressed against my ears. I turned to David, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now?" He didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the spot where the creature had been. Finally, he said, "We keep moving. Stay calm. Stay alert. Stay calm." The words felt impossible. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, my hands trembling uncontrollably. But I nodded, forcing myself to take a step forward. My legs felt like they were moving through molasses, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run back to the SUV. As we walked, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. The knocks started again, echoing from different directions, each one closer than the last. They weren't random. There was a pattern to them, a rhythm that made my skin crawl. David stopped abruptly, his head snapping to the right. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Footsteps," he said. "There's more than one." My stomach dropped. The idea of facing one of these creatures was terrifying enough. The thought of encountering several of them, I couldn't even comprehend it. I tightened my grip on David's arm, my nails digging into his skin. "We need to leave," I whispered. "Now," but before we could move, a loud crash erupted from the trees behind us. It sounded like a tree falling, the impact reverberating through the ground. I spun around, my eyes wide with terror. "What was that?" David didn't answer. He was already pulling me forward, his pace quick and urgent. "Keep moving," he said, his voice firm. "Don't look back." We didn't make it far before the sound of heavy footsteps began to follow us. They were deliberate, slow at first, but growing faster, louder. My pulse raced as I realized whatever was behind us was closing the distance. I glanced over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. Through the trees, I could see a shadowy figure moving toward us. It was massive, its strides impossibly long. My mind screamed at my legs to move faster, but fear made my body clumsy. I tripped over a root, nearly falling face first into the dirt. David caught me, pulling me upright. "Run!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the haze of panic in my mind. We sprinted down the trail, the forest blurring around us. My lungs burned, my legs screaming in protest, but I didn't dare slow down. The footsteps behind us were relentless, thundering through the underbrush like the beat of a war drum. It felt like the forest itself was alive, conspiring to trap us. We burst into a small clearing, the sunlight blinding after the dim canopy of the woods. David skidded to a stop, his chest heaving. "This way," he said, grabbing my hand and pulling me toward a narrow path that led downhill. As we descended, the footsteps seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. My relief was short-lived. A guttural growl echoed through the trees, low and menacing. It wasn't behind us anymore. It was ahead. David froze, his hand tightening around mine. "Stay close," he whispered, his eyes scanning the path ahead. The growl came again, louder this time, resonating deep in my chest. My knees felt weak, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there, waiting for us. We edged forward cautiously, every step feeling like it might be our last. The forest seemed darker now, the sunlight unable to penetrate the thick canopy above. Shadows loomed on either side of the path, shifting and twisting as if they were alive. Then I saw it. Just ahead, partially hidden by a cluster of trees, was another figure. This one was larger than the first, its shoulders so broad they seemed to blend with the trunks around it. Its eyes glinted in the dim light, reflecting an intelligence that sent a shiver down my spine. David raised his hand, motioning for me to stop. "Don't move," he said, his voice barely audible. "We're too close." Too close to what? I wanted to scream. But I bit my lip, forcing myself to stay still. My body was trembling, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I knew it was useless. We couldn't outrun them. We couldn't hide. The creature stepped forward, its massive frame coming into full view. My breath caught in my throat as I took in its sheer size. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a perfect blend of primal power and unsettling intelligence. And it was looking directly at us. The creature stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, its black eyes locking onto ours. I could see the subtle rise and fall of its chest, hear the faint rustle of its fur as the breeze played through the clearing. Its head tilted slightly, as if studying us, deciding whether we were a threat or perhaps an easy meal. My legs felt like they had turned to stone, unable to move despite the primal urge to flee coursing through me. David's voice broke the silence. "Don't make any sudden moves," he murmured, his hand hovering near his holster. "We don't want to provoke it." I nodded, unable to speak, my eyes fixed on the massive figure before us. It was close now, close enough that I could make out the individual strands of fur on its shoulders, the way its muscles shifted beneath its skin. It was like looking at a nightmare made flesh, something that didn't belong in our world yet stood before us nonetheless. As the creature took a step closer, I couldn't stop the sharp gasp that escaped my lips. Its footfall was impossibly quiet for something so large, its movements almost graceful. David shifted slightly, placing himself between me and the creature. "Back up slowly," he whispered, his tone calm but firm. I tried to follow his instructions, my feet dragging across the uneven ground. Each step felt agonizingly slow, the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The creature watched us with an eerie stillness, its head tilting again as if listening to something we couldn't hear. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a sharp, piercing cry echoed through the forest. It wasn't human, but it wasn't like anything I'd heard from an animal either. The creature before us froze, its head snapping to the side. The cry came again, louder this time, reverberating through the trees like a siren. David and I exchanged a glance, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, his hand tightening around mine. Before either of us could react, the creature turned and disappeared into the forest with a speed that defied logic. It didn't crash through the underbrush like I would have expected from something so massive. It moved like a shadow, melting into the trees until it was gone. The cry sounded again, and this time it was accompanied by a series of knocks like wood striking wood. The sound came from multiple directions, surrounding us. My pulse quickened, fear twisting in my gut. Whatever had scared the creature away was still out there, and it was getting closer. David pulled me forward, his grip firm. "We need to move," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." We stumbled through the forest, our movements frantic and uncoordinated. The cries and knocks seemed to follow us, echoing through the trees like a predator toying with its prey. I couldn't tell where they were coming from, the sounds bouncing off the dense foliage and creating an oppressive wall of noise. David led us downhill, his strides purposeful despite the uneven terrain. I followed as best I could, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. My ankle twisted on a loose rock, and I stumbled, barely catching myself on a nearby tree. "I can't keep up," I gasped, clutching my side. He turned, his expression grim. "We don't have a choice. If we stop, we're sitting ducks." The forest seemed to close in around us, the once familiar landscape becoming a maze of shadows and unseen threats. We reached a steep ravine, its sides slick with mud and loose stones. David hesitated, glancing back the way we had come. The knocks had grown louder, closer, their rhythm chaotic and unsettling. "We'll climb down," he said, his jaw set. "It's our best chance." I stared at the sheer drop, my stomach churning. "You can't be serious." "I'll go first," he said, already lowering himself over the edge. Follow my lead. Just take it slow. I watched as he disappeared over the side, his hands gripping the roots and rocks jutting from the earth. My hands were slick with sweat as I grasped the edge, my legs trembling as I began my descent. The ground crumbled beneath my feet, sending a shower of dirt and stones tumbling into the ravine below. Halfway down, the knocking stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, more unnerving than the noise had been. I froze, my grip tightening on a root. "David," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I think they've stopped." His voice drifted up from below. "Keep moving. We're almost there." As I reached the bottom of the ravine, I realized how dark it had become. The sun was still up, but the towering walls of earth blocked out most of the light, casting long, shifting shadows across the ground. David was already moving, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. "This way," he said, motioning for me to follow. The air was cooler here, damp and heavy. The ground was littered with fallen branches and leaves, the remnants of countless storms. I stumbled over a root, catching myself against a jagged rock. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice shaky. "There's a stream up ahead," David said. "If we follow it, it should lead us out." The stream was little more than a trickle, its water dark and sluggish. We followed it in silence, the sound of our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of moss and leaves. My nerves were frayed, every rustle of the underbrush making me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was following us in the shadows. Then I saw it, a flash of movement in my peripheral vision. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. "Did you see that?" I hissed, grabbing David's arm. He stopped, his flashlight sweeping across the ravine walls. "See what?" "Something moved," I said, my voice trembling. "Up there on the ridge." He stared for a moment, his jaw tight. "Keep going," he said finally. "Don't stop." The knocks started again as we rounded a bend in the ravine, echoing off the walls like gunshots. They were closer now, impossibly close. I clutched David's arm, my nails digging into his skin. "We're not going to make it," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. He didn't answer, his eyes scanning the shadows. His flashlight caught a glint of movement, and he froze. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low and steady. He drew his gun, the metallic click loud in the stillness. The creature stepped into the beam of light, its massive form dwarfing the narrow ravine. My breath hitched as I took in its sheer size, its black fur shimmering in the pale light. It didn't move, its eyes locked on David's, its expression unreadable. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The forest held its breath, the world narrowing to the space between us and the creature. Then it let out a low, rumbling growl, the sound vibrating through the ground beneath our feet. David raised his gun, his hand steady. "Stay back," he said, his voice firm. The creature didn't move. It simply stared at us, its eyes dark and inscrutable. Then, as if deciding we weren't worth the effort, it turned and vanished into the shadows, its footsteps fading into the distance. We stood there for a long time, the silence stretching between us. When I finally found my voice, it was barely a whisper. "What do we do now?" David turned to me, his expression hard. "We get out of here, and we never come back." David's words echoed in my mind, "We never come back." But leaving wasn't as simple as walking out of the woods. Every direction felt like a trap, the looming trees and jagged ravine walls closing in around us. I stayed close behind him, my hands trembling, my breaths shallow and ragged. The silence in the ravine was absolute now, no knocks, no distant howls, just the oppressive quiet of the forest. We followed the stream, the faint trickle of water our only guide in the suffocating darkness. The light from David's flashlight carved a narrow path ahead, illuminating the mossy rocks and slick mud underfoot. I stumbled more than once, my shoes slipping on the damp ground. Each time, David would pause, his hand outstretched to steady me, his eyes scanning the shadows. The fear of pursuit was overwhelming. Every step felt like a gamble, like we were walking a razor-thin line between survival and something far worse. I couldn't stop my mind from conjuring images of the creature stalking us, its massive form looming just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "We'll find a way out," David said, his voice steady but low. Just keep moving. I nodded, unable to muster a response. My throat was dry, my lips chapped, and my body ached from the constant tension. The air in the ravine was stifling, a mix of damp earth and decaying leaves that clung to my skin and made it hard to breathe. After what felt like hours, the ravine began to widen, the steep walls giving way to gentler slopes. The trees thinned out, and I caught a glimpse of the sky, a narrow ribbon of grey tinged with the fading light of day. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. We need to move faster, David said, his voice tight. We're too exposed here. The open space should have made me feel safer, but instead it left me feeling vulnerable, as if the forest itself was watching. The knocks and howls might have stopped, but the sense of being hunted hadn't. It clung to me like a second skin, making every nerve in my body scream for me to run. David led the way up a shallow incline, the flashlight bobbing with his movements. The ground was uneven, littered with roots and rocks that threatened to trip me with every step. My legs burned from the effort, my lungs straining for air, but I didn't dare stop. Stopping meant becoming prey. As we crested the hill, the faint glow of moonlight broke through the trees, casting long, twisted shadows across the forest floor. The sight should have been a comfort, a sign that we were leaving the depths of the ravine behind, but it only made the shadows feel alive. "Do you hear that?" David asked, his steps faltering. I froze, my ears straining. At first there was nothing, just the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then I heard it. A low, guttural sound, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakably close. The sound sent a shiver down my spine. It was unlike anything I'd heard before, a mix of a growl and a moan, as if something massive was exerting its presence just out of sight. David motioned for me to stay quiet, his flashlight snapping off to plunge us into darkness. My heart raced as the world around us vanished, replaced by the faint glow of moonlight and the suffocating blackness of the forest. We crouched low, pressing ourselves against the slope of the hill. My knees dug into the dirt, the damp earth soaking through my jeans. I clutched David's arm, my fingers digging into his skin as the sound grew louder, closer. Whatever was making it wasn't in the ravine anymore. It had followed us. David slowly reached for his holster, the metallic click of his gun being drawn impossibly loud in the stillness. "Don't move," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, my body frozen with fear. My eyes darted through the shadows, searching for any sign of movement. The sound grew louder still, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to echo in my chest. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable. Every second stretched into an eternity, the tension coiling tighter and tighter until I thought I might scream. Then, from somewhere to our left, came the sound of heavy footfalls. Whatever it was close, too close. David shifted slightly, his gun raised, his body tense. I could feel the weight of his resolve, the determination to protect us no matter the cost. I wanted to believe we were safe, that the gun in his hand was enough to keep the creature at bay. But deep down, I knew the truth. This thing wasn't like anything we'd ever faced before. It wasn't afraid of us, and it certainly wasn't afraid of a weapon. The footsteps grew louder, each one deliberate and unhurried. It was toying with us, letting us know it was there, that it could strike at any moment. My pulse thundered in my ears as I pressed myself against the ground, trying to make myself as small as possible. David's voice was a low growl, barely more than a whisper. When I say go, run, I opened my mouth to protest, but he silenced me with a sharp look. There was no room for argument, no time for hesitation. He was going to buy us time, and I hated him for it. The creature stepped into the moonlight, its massive form towering over the trees. My breath caught in my throat as I took in the sheer size of it, the way the light glinted off its black fur and the menacing gleam in its eyes. It stared at us, its gaze cold and calculating, and I knew we were outmatched. David's finger tightened on the trigger, the faint click of the safety disengaging echoing in the night. "Go," he said, his voice calm and steady. I didn't think, I just ran. My legs burned as I sprinted up the hill, the sound of my own ragged breathing drowning out everything else. I didn't look back, didn't dare risk seeing what was happening behind me. My only focus was on getting away, on putting as much distance between myself and that creature as possible. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging cuts on my cheeks and arms. The uneven ground threatened to trip me with every step, but I pushed forward, fueled by sheer terror. The forest blurred around me, the shadows twisting and shifting like living things. Behind me I heard a gunshot, followed by a deafening roar that shook the ground beneath my feet. The sound sent a fresh wave of panic coursing through me, my body moving faster than I thought possible. David's voice rang out, shouting something I couldn't make out over the pounding of my heart. The trees began to thin, the faint glow of headlights piercing through the darkness ahead. The sight of the road was a lifeline, a promise of safety that pushed me forward. I stumbled out of the forest, my legs giving out beneath me as I collapsed onto the gravel. David appeared moments later, his face pale and his breaths ragged. He dropped to his knees beside me, his hands gripping my shoulders. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. I nodded, unable to speak. My body was shaking, my mind reeling from the ordeal. But we were alive. Against all odds, we had survived. The road felt like a haven, its gravel surface a thin but reassuring barrier between us and the nightmare that had pursued us. David pulled me to my feet, his hands firm on my arms as he steadied me. I swayed, my legs weak, but I managed to stand. The SUV was only a few yards away, its familiar outline glowing under the pale moonlight. "Get in," David urged, his voice urgent but gentle. He didn't have to tell me twice. I stumbled toward the vehicle, my every step faltering but determined. David stayed behind, his head snapping back toward the woods, his weapon still drawn. I climbed into the passenger seat, the door slamming shut behind me. David circled the SUV, his eyes scanning the tree line. For a moment I thought he might not get in, that his stubborn curiosity would win out over reason. But then he opened the driver's door and slid in beside me. The sight of him there, safe and solid, loosened a knot of tension I hadn't realized I was holding. He started the engine, the familiar rumble breaking the silence. The headlights flared to life, slicing through the darkness and illuminating the dense wall of trees ahead. David shifted into reverse, and the SUV lurched backward, its tires crunching over the gravel as we put distance between ourselves and the forest. Neither of us spoke as David maneuvered the vehicle back onto the main road. The cabin's warm glow, the ravine, the creek, they all disappeared behind us, swallowed by the night. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to clasp them together to keep them still. Every nerve in my body felt frayed, stretched to the breaking point. David kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, his jaw tight. I knew he wanted to ask me something, but the words wouldn't come. He had seen enough to know that what we had experienced wasn't normal, wasn't anything that could be easily explained. I could see the questions swirling in his mind, but neither of us was ready to voice them. The miles stretched on, the road winding through the countryside like an endless ribbon. The faint glow of the dashboard lights was the only illumination, casting eerie shadows across David's face. I watched him grip the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his eyes locked on the road ahead. Finally, he broke the silence. "What do you think it wanted?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head, my throat tight. "I don't know," I whispered, "but it didn't feel like it wanted to hurt us. Not really." David nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "It could have," he said. "If it wanted to, it could have." The unspoken truth hung heavy between us. Whatever it was, it had chosen to let us go. And that was almost more terrifying than if it had attacked. When we reached home, the house felt alien, its cozy interior too small and too fragile to hold the weight of what we had just experienced. I collapsed onto the couch, my body sinking into the cushions like I might never get up again. David paced the room, his hands running through his hair as he muttered under his breath. "I don't understand," he said finally, stopping in front of me. "I don't understand any of it. What was it doing there? Why did it let us go?" I met his gaze, my own fear reflected in his eyes. Maybe it wasn't about us, I said. Maybe we just stumbled into its territory. David frowned, his hands on his hips. But why now? After all these years, why show itself again? I didn't have an answer. The memories of our previous encounter in 2003 flooded back. The shadowy figure crossing the road, the raw terror I had felt. It had been real then, and it was real now. But the pieces didn't fit. The puzzle too vast and too strange to comprehend. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around them. What if it's not just one? I said softly. What if there's more of them? A whole group living out there, hidden. David's eyes darkened, and he nodded slowly. It would explain the knocks, he said. The way it seemed like we were surrounded. The thought chilled me to my core. We had escaped, but not because we were smarter or faster or braver. We had escaped because they had let us. In the days that followed, the experience lingered like a shadow, its presence impossible to shake. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the window sent my heart racing. I couldn't step outside without scanning the tree line, my eyes searching for a glimpse of movement that wasn't there. David tried to distract me, throwing himself into work and projects around the house. But I could see the strain in his eyes, the way he jumped at every unexpected noise. He hadn't said it outright, but I knew he was just as shaken as I was. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the world in twilight, I found myself standing at the edge of the woods behind our house. The trees loomed tall and dark, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. I stared into the shadows, my heart pounding. "What are you doing?" David's voice startled me, and I turned to see him standing on the porch, his arms crossed. "I don't know," I admitted. I feel like it's not over." He nodded, his expression grim. "It's never over, is it?" "Not really." I didn't have an answer for him. I wasn't sure there was one. Weeks later, I woke in the middle of the night, my heart racing. At first, I didn't know what had woken me, but then I heard it, a faint knock echoing from the woods. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, straining to hear. The knock came again, louder this time, and then a third time. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like a signal. I sat up, my body trembling, and glanced at David. He was awake too, his eyes wide in the darkness. Without a word, he got out of bed and reached for his gun. I followed him to the window, our movements slow and cautious. The yard was bathed in moonlight, its shadows long and deep. The woods loomed beyond, a black wall of uncertainty, and then I saw it. Just for a moment, a fleeting shadow at the edge of the trees. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. David placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "We're not going back," he said quietly. I nodded, my eyes locked on the tree line. "No," I said, "we're not." But even as I spoke the words, I knew the truth. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a presence, a force that couldn't be ignored. And no matter how far we ran, it would always be there, waiting.